team. I want to welcome all of you to Casa de California here in Mexico City. It's a pleasure to have all of you with us today, and a real pleasure to be with this distinguished panel doing some very important work on a critically important topic for the binational relationship between the United States and Mexico, and specifically between California and Mexico. So beginning in 2021, Alianza MX has brought together academic researchers like those we're about to hear on today's research panel on light-duty vehicles, government officials like Marta Delgado, who we heard from this morning, and industry representatives like those that we will hear from on the following panel, a policy dialogue, to establish a high-level task force on the electrification of transport. This task force has convened multiple working group meetings across 3 sectors of the auto industry: light-duty vehicles, medium and heavy-duty vehicles, and electromobility in cities, looking at the issue of the movement towards zero-emissions transportation in Mexico and the United States. So why have we been doing this work? I think recent news has highlighted just how important understanding these issues is starting to be, has been for some time. Just 1 week ago, on April 12th, the Biden administration proposed 2 rules under the EPA that would shift the US auto industry toward a zero-emissions future, with 2/3 of passenger cars and 1/4 of heavy trucks in the United States all electric by 2032. As we heard from Leanne Randolph this morning, all new car sales in California are expected to be zero-emissions vehicles by 2035. And CARB is also looking at ending combustion truck sales in California by 2036. So the future is rapidly approaching. And in Mexico, as we heard from Undersecretary Delgado, the Foreign Ministry has presented its own roadmap for electrification, given the critical importance of the auto industry in Mexico, and in particular exports to the United States. So we're looking at the transportation sector in particular because of its weight in greenhouse gas emissions, not only in the US, where the EPA measured the transportation sector at 28% of total emissions in 2021, but also in Mexico, where Semarnat found that they were 25% of greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. This research session brings together a key team of researchers from the University of California and from Mexico who've been studying options to support an integrated cross-border economy for zero-emissions vehicles and the strategies to reach that future. In order, I want to introduce Gil Tal, immediately to my right, Director of the Plug-in Hybrid and Electric Vehicle Research Center of the Institute for Transportation Studies at UC Davis. To Gil's right, Alyssa Kendall, who's a professor of engineering at UC Davis. To her right, Sarah White, who's Director of Labor Policy and Research at the Institute of Transportation Studies at Davis, and Alex Covarrubias, who's Director of the Transporter Studies Program at El Colegio de Sonora. They've all been key pieces in a strategic research project led by Dr. Tal on the electrification of transport that we discussed a little bit in the inauguration ceremony this morning, looking at the challenges and opportunities also for the US-Mexico transportation industry. I do want to highlight that their work has recently been published on the Alianza Mexico website, alianzamx.universityofcalifornia.edu. There are policy briefs on the implications of global EV adoption targets and on US-Mexico secondhand vehicle trade, as well as on exploring the potential for electrified transit buses in Mexico. We'll be discussing that issue of electromobility in a plenary session tomorrow. These policy briefs also have links to full reports, so we would encourage all of you to take a look at those publications and the incredible work that these researchers are doing. And we're looking forward also to hearing about forthcoming research, particularly on the effects of the zero-emissions vehicle transition on labor markets in California and Mexico from our researchers today. I do want to highlight something very important for all of you to keep in mind throughout the summit that we at Alianza MX are really, really excited about, that these research sessions where we're hearing from individuals doing some incredible analysis on these key issues will be followed by policy dialogues. The policy dialogues will be focused on interactions between stakeholders outside of academia, policymakers, community leaders, non-governmental organizations, and the like. And so while our sincere hope is that we can encourage dialogue among these panelists this morning, we also want you to keep in mind that these panels are in dialogue with one another. This is a critically important piece of this summit, that researchers have an opportunity to share their insights to help inform policymaking processes and decision-making for those outside of academia, but also for those outside of academia to communicate their understanding of these issues so that these researchers and others can move forward with new projects at the cutting edge of these critically important issues. So thank you very much for being with us this morning, and we'll begin with the presentation from Dr. Tal.
Good morning. Can we start the slides, please? So thank you very much. It's great to be here. Great to be here again. It's a great learning experience, learning from each other, meeting new and old friends. And I really enjoy every visit and learn from every visit. In the last year that we worked together, we are what we can say drinking for the fire hose. We are working on many big topics, and we are trying to work together and get forward with a lot of things and make the change. These are just a few slides from the last couple of meetings, but they are not all. And also I cannot put all the different names and people that we work with. This is most of these people are our team in UC Davis, but the number of collaborators is much bigger than that. So I every time I'm giving a presentation on the topic, I think we don't need we don't need to talk about why anymore. But again and again, now when the EPA announced, I figure out we need to talk about why to electrify light-duty vehicles again. I will give it in 30 seconds. One, because the technology is ready and we can have it. We don't need to talk about it. We can make it happen. Number two, electrifying the light-duty vehicles in everywhere is not contradicting any other of the tools we have to reduce greenhouse gas and combat climate change. We can do it without reducing any other. We can do it with other tools. Number three, and very important, we can do it without changing our lifestyle and behavior. And that's a big benefit of electrifying light-duty vehicles. People don't need to do something else. They don't need to change their life. They don't need to give up on anything. It's an easy. And number four, every time we analyze it, we find that it's also save money. And the benefit to society is not just on greenhouse gases, it's also on criteria pollution, on local pollutions, and it's actually going to benefit the economy. So there are no, I think that the why, we have to go back to it, but that's not, should not take too much time. Let's talk about how. How, again, 30 seconds on how. We are doing it for many years. We are trying to create the market by giving big subsidies and make people like these cars and educate them and all of that. That's one thing. Number two, infrastructure and chargers. Number three that I will talk about today, helping building the supply chain and making more of these cars. So today I will focus on number three, about making changing the industry to make more electric car. It's not that the other two are not important. If we can go back to the slides, but let's talk about the change and how it will impact or may impact the Mexican light-duty vehicle industry. It's a huge industry. This is a slide. The right side is from AMIA. I will not be able to read my own slides. There is a glass here, but I will try. And on the left, I wanted just to kind of give you the perspective of this main player, like Stellantis, VW, that Mexico is not a big part of their global production, maybe 5% or 6% for Stellantis globally, but it's a big player in the North America market. 21% of Stellantis North America production is in Mexico. For other OEMs like VW, most of the North America production is happening in Mexico. So when we are talking about this change, it's a global change. We have to keep thinking about how the things change globally. I should have add maybe Tesla here, but Tesla is just an announcement. These are actual productions of light-duty vehicles. So what I would like to present today, this is a big research. You can download the 50 pages. But what we are doing is we're looking at how the demand change for cars, light duty vehicles, and for electric vehicles around the world, how they're being traded, where they're being made, where they're being sold, and then talking about the production in each country. I would like to give this example that how our life is complicated. GM making really nice cars in China and selling them in Mexico. GM making really nice cars in Mexico and selling them in the US. So it's a very complicated story that we need to follow, and that's what we are trying to do today. And today what I will do is I will look at how different trade agreements and trade scenarios are going to change the Mexican auto industry. Now, it's hard to read, but there are two big changes. One is the total number of light-duty vehicles is going up. The US market is not growing anymore. There are more cars than drivers in the US, but the Mexico market is growing. Latin America is growing. India is growing. Many other markets are still growing. That's the first change. The second change is the shift from internal combustion engine to electric. And both of these changes we will talk about today and how they will impact the industry. So next one. That's an example for the results. These are actual numbers for today. So you can see the first line is vehicles coming into North America or USMCA, Canada, US, and Mexico from all over the world. Then the second is the production within a region. The third is the sale, and the last one is exports. So if we look at Mexico, Mexico make in a good year almost 4 million vehicles, 1.3 million are being sold in Mexico. Most of the cars in Mexico are going to the US. Other cars coming to the US from Japan, Europe, Korea, and so on. Mexico also export very few cars outside of the North America trade. On the right side, you see the same figure for EVs for 2021. In 21, Mexico produced 110,000 electric vehicles, mostly Ford. Most of them were going to the US, as you can see, but half of them Ford export to Europe, which was a surprise. So not a surprise, but a very different story. So when we look on EVs and light duty internal combustion, very different story. Now let's try to talk about the future. So as I said, in the future, China, 2035, sorry, it's somewhere in the bottom, 2035, let's look at one future, so it will be easy. 2035, China will need 34 million cars every year, and we hope the 21 million, almost 22, will be electric. As you can see in the US, the market will shrink a little bit, but we hope that it will be mostly electric. 10 million out of 16 more or less will be electric. And in Mexico, the light-duty vehicle market will grow maybe to more than 2 million, but current trends are a little bit slow, and it's 156,000 will be electric. So we have this one future scenario. We'll not go into details, but this is how many total cars you can see. Most markets are growing except from the kind of developing countries that are shrinking a little bit, but the EV is changing dramatically. What else is changing, or what else we need to take into account? These numbers are the average battery size of an electric car sold in these markets today. When you are selling an American electric car, it's 82 kilowatt hour of battery within this car. When you sell an electric car in France or Japan or Italy, it's only 50 kilowatt hour. So if the Mexican car companies are selling a lot of cars to the US, they will need much more batteries per vehicle for each vehicle you sell. So we need to take that into account. And if the trends will go to even bigger and bigger trucks, that will go to close to 100 kilowatt hour per vehicle in the future. So very much depends where you send your cars, that's how much batteries you will need. So we ran 2.5 scenarios, and that will be the result that I will show today. Scenario number one, let's say that in 2035, the number of cars and electric cars will just be the same as today, just more, keeping the same ratios. Scenario number two, the trades are bad. All the countries are trying to keep domestic production, fighting each other, very little trades. And in scenario number 2, we even not allowing Mexico, Canada, and the US to trade much. They kind of reduce their trade. Scenario number 2B, same thing around the world. Everyone is trying to lower trade and make more domestic cars, but we do keep the USMCA. So in the scenario number 2B, Canada, US, and Mexico are the same unit. And the last scenario is open trade. Everyone buy cars from wherever they can get them the cheapest. Now let's see how it will impact Mexico. This is what we believe will look like the Mexico light-duty vehicle production in 2035 under these 4 scenarios. So the top one is the light-duty vehicles. The bottom one, it's the EVs. So that's today. You see 2019, 21 today, almost 4 million light-duty vehicles, 100,000 electric cars. Scenario number 1, keeping the same ratios. We are talking about market growing a little bit, 4.4 million, and almost 2 million of them will be electric. And then if there is no USMCA, we expect the total industry to shrink a little bit, and we expect only 1.3 million electric cars without USMCA. Let's jump to the last one. With global open trade, we also see not a very rosy future for the industry in Mexico. We see in this case, it will be China and others that will take much bigger market share. And then the Mexican total LDV market will be 3.5 million in this scenario, electric will 1.4. So in our scenarios, the success story is USMCA, and it's by far much bigger. Now, these are scenarios based on some assumptions. So let's now talk about these assumptions and how policy can change them. Because this is not telling the future. These are just telling 4 different stories based on different assumptions on the future. Oh, and one more point. As I said, because most of the production is going to the North America market, we need a lot of batteries. And when we were looking at how much batteries each one of these scenarios will need, we see that in the good scenarios, we need way more than what we have today. Of course, that can be imported from China, from anywhere in the world, but it's still, we don't have enough battery supply to meet these scenarios. And I'm trying. Okay. So what kind of like, what do we think about it? Well, current domestic market, I already talked. So expected growth in developing markets. The growth, if we think about how the Mexican industry and Mexican economy will grow, big part of it will be opening new markets to markets that are growing. If it's South America, Asia, and other markets. And also internal domestic market will grow. And as I said, the EV market growth is very much depends on the US market. So that's probably very important to keep developing the secondary market and so on. And the dependence on the US market is good, but it creates a very specific type of vehicles, big ones. So we need to kind of think about it. These are the kind of vehicles that today our friend the GM and other are making. They're good for a very specific market. If you take one of these cars and put it in Europe on a street or somewhere else, they really look too big. So we need to think about it. And so we were thinking about kind of broadening it up to other markets would be a good idea that the Mexican government should try and help. We're also thinking about, okay, right now, all of the decisions are being made by these international companies, bringing new players, helping new players. The Mexican government is already doing it. And the electric only player, Tesla is one example, but there are many more electric only players are the game changers. And I think that's actually on my, that's one, so more players, electric only players, and developing new markets. And many of these developments are post 2035, because it's not ending in 2035. And the EVs that are now going to flood the US market will have to be smaller, more efficient and cheaper, and then go to Latin America, for example. So what we want to do next? We're doing a lot of work on what does it mean for batteries and minerals, because I just talked about final production. That's only one. We have first tier, second tier, third tier. A lot of that is our next steps. Refining the scenarios and getting feedback from you guys, from everyone who wants to give us feedback. What should we run next? How should it look like? How to refine our scenario? Looking at the medium and heavy duty, a lot of additional demand that we need to take into account. And considering, as I said, the entire supply chain. So I will stop here and probably move to Alisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tal. Dr. Kendall.
Well, hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I'll get started, I guess, as my slides get loaded up. And I'm going to talk, Gil did a great job of setting the stage about essentially new vehicle production, but I'm going to talk about the flow of used vehicles, and particularly used vehicles moving from the US to Mexico. And as we electrify the US fleet, it's going to have implications for the kinds of vehicles that are showing up in Mexico, and for implications around essentially. Yeah, okay. It's a drill, everyone. I think we'll keep going. Okay, so in any case, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk first about the life cycle of an electric vehicle. So the life cycle begins with raw material supply and extraction and refining. Because we've replaced an engine powertrain with a battery and motor, we have really different supply chains, and those supply chains are growing right now. And those supply chains need minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, and there's a lot of focus right now on understanding where those materials will come from and making sure that the supply chains they come from are developed in a more just and equitable way than our incumbent supply chains, like for oil and gas. Once we manufacture that battery and it goes into a vehicle for use, the batteries degrade in one direction. Okay, they degrade. They go from sort of perfect state of health as we measure it to poor state of health. And there's no real reversing that unless you do some real sort of remanufacturing on it. And the reason I bring that up is that if a country has a lot of used vehicle imports and they're arriving with aged batteries, that's really different than arriving with an aged engine. The ability to repair is really different, for example. And in Mexico right now, about 20% of the on-road fleet is comprised of used vehicles from the US. And we'll look at some data in a second on that. Once that battery is used, we hope that it's collected and that ultimately it will be recycled, where we recover the important materials from it, or all the materials, not just the important ones. But we can also repurpose and remanufacture. Repurposing means taking that battery and using it for something else, like to provide stationary energy storage or in less demanding applications. One challenge we have is that recycling infrastructure for EV batteries is not really there yet. We are recycling batteries in North America, but we don't really have the infrastructure yet to think about this sort of large flow of batteries that's going to happen 10 to 12 years after we see really big increases in EV adoption. And of course, if Mexico's receiving a bunch of used vehicles, they arrive more quickly to that recycling stage. All right, so what do secondhand vehicle imports to Mexico look like? I'm just showing you here, starting in 2005, when secondhand imports from the US were legalized, more restrictions were removed, and then a number of different policy actions taken by Mexico to essentially manage the vehicles that were allowed to come in. So things like age restrictions, as an example. You see a stabilization in imports around 200,000 vehicles a year starting in 2015. But one thing I want to point out is that there are, most of the management that's out there has been about age restrictions. So an 8-year limit, right? If an EV has been purchased and it's been driven a lot, its battery could be in pretty poor shape 8 years on, right? Some are going to be in great shape at years, but others aren't. So our mechanism for managing the quality of vehicles moving across the border may need to change as we electrify. So this was some scenarios that we developed thinking about what it might look like in the future in terms of the proportion of electric vehicles moving from the US to Mexico based on different scenarios. This figure's a little bit funny to look at, but if you look at the whole green area, the light green and the dark green, if we add those up, that's if we just continue for Mexico to take about the same age vehicles, 5 to 9 years old, from the US that are going to be sort of retiring from the US roads right then. And if that happens, you can see that we'll quickly, by like, say, 2036, 2038, you're seeing half of vehicles moving into Mexico being electric already. If instead Mexican consumers say, actually, we don't really want all these old EVs, we're going to wait until we have infrastructure here, charging infrastructure, things like that, we're looking at the dark green area, where it basically says Mexican consumers aren't going to want these used EVs until there's enough sort of new EV adoption and infrastructure investment on the Mexico side. So these are two different futures. In that case, the light green turns into the dark gray there. So you continue importing more used internal combustion engine vehicles for that time. So why does it matter? I already pointed out you have these older batteries, and unlike engines, batteries are really hard or impossible to repair. And that means that those used EVs are going to generate a waste stream much faster than new EVs sold in Mexico. And depending on the cost and availability of replacement batteries, it could also mean ultimately that you're retiring vehicles from the road much faster. So if a replacement battery costs $6,000 and the vehicle it's in is valued at about $2,500, you're not going to do that, right? So you might have whole vehicles retiring faster as well. This means that there could be, or likely will be, a disproportionate burden on Mexico to manage these end-of-life vehicles and end-of-life batteries. And by disproportionate, I mean the benefit of vehicle electrification isn't really getting realized, but the waste stream is. So this is not the easiest flow diagram to read, but this is cumulative EV registrations through 2050 in Mexico. And while it's hard to see, the dark blue on the right side there are two flows. One is in-use EVs, that's 3 million about, and then deregistered EVs at the very bottom, 1 million. It's a bit cut off. And what I want you to look at is the ratio between the big green one at the top and the little green one at the bottom. That's the ratio of on-road EVs and retired EVs that were new in Mexico. The two blue ones are ones that were used from the US. What you can see is the contribution to deregistered or retired EVs is much higher in relative terms from the used ones. That's just pointing out you're going to get more waste for each of these vehicles coming in. What does this mean for cumulative, say, mass of retired EV batteries in Mexico? It means a lot. So the orange line there is saying that retired EVs from the US in 2050 will have comprised about 12% of the registered EV fleet, but cumulatively will have supplied about half of the retired battery mass. So this big disproportionate sort of delivery of waste batteries. Part of this is because at the early years of adoption, secondhand vehicles from the US might be a much bigger component of EVs in Mexico. Whereas when new vehicle EV sales go up a lot in Mexico, then that burden changes. Okay, so I've presented a problem and only really talked about the problem. So let's talk about some of the interventions, things we could do to maybe make sure this isn't a problem and that the unintended consequences for Mexico are good ones. So first, we probably need some rules about ensuring that there's sufficient remaining battery life for a used EV to really serve the second consumer. This is needed globally, not just between US and Mexico, but US and Mexico has the capacity to do a great job of actually setting this up. Some of the work that California's done in the ACC2, for example, to make sure that there are easy to read onboard diagnostics for state of health could help enable some really straightforward and simple rules about what EVs can be transferred between countries. Something like a minimum of 90% state of health as an example. This can prevent the risk that used EV sales are actually just a cheap way to dump batteries, because batteries may not be profitable to recycle, especially as we design out the expensive materials like cobalt. The other thing is that damaged and old EV batteries have higher risk of safety problems. If we can invest in diagnostics that are easy to use and low cost, maybe that can enable, making sure that things are moving across that have batteries in safe condition. But it probably would also, the same tools could enable more repairability, more repurposing, and more remanufacturing. Finally, I think we should really think about battery recycling policy from a North America standpoint. We have this highly integrated and interdependent new vehicle manufacturing. There's no reason the end of life should look terribly different, because those end-of-life batteries are a source of new materials for new battery production. And if we think holistically about the North American market, then we could really do a good job of sort of keeping these minerals within North America and making sure that all that new battery demand that Gil showed us can be met in part by these retiring EVs. And if we know that the US is going to be selling used EVs into the Mexican market, we should all be thinking about North American policies for recycling. Maybe that includes some kind of extended producer responsibility, which no one wants to hear, I know, but other kinds of mechanisms to assign responsibility that aren't simply at national scale, because we know that these used vehicles are flowing across borders. All right, so that's the end here, and I think we'll pass it to Sarah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, is this on? Okay, can you hear me? Okay, great. I sometimes have trouble with these mics, so you'll have to let me know. So my talk's gonna be a little bit different. I don't have slides for you because we don't yet have a lot of data. What I'm going to do instead is talk a little bit about our framework for the jobs research that we're doing in coordination with the other pieces of transportation research. So the University of California has a high road framework, not unlike the state of California and its policymaking. And this says that the decarbonization of transportation is part of a transition, a much larger transition to what we would call a high road economy, one that's more sustainable and one that's also more equitable. And so whatever the technological path, whatever the technology, whatever the sector, there's a way to do it in which investments in productivity and in innovation feed a flourishing low carbon economy. It's supported by sustainable transportation systems, which connect Californians and Mexicans to economic opportunity. There's an entire body of scholarship and practice around the high road and high road economics. We are going to bring a lot of that to bear on this particular work. It is a body of scholarship which was developed in contrast to sort of traditional assumptions that economic development was inevitably on the low road, that it inevitably involved a race to the bottom on wages, or the commodification of community resources. So we have a scholarly model which looks at the economics from the point of view of the high road, and how do we do that, and what kind of policies enforce that. So the principle of the high road is simple. It is that the people who design and build and recycle, in this case, vehicles and infrastructure and batteries, actually benefit from the economic and the health wins that come from decarbonizing economy. So it's a model for shared prosperity, and we have a lens to look at that, in which there's a robust international market economy, but it pays attention to jobs, and it does so by centering job quality. We heard Chair Randolph say this morning that we know that in California, many of our low carbon policies are going to generate hundreds of thousands of new jobs. But what kind of jobs? That's what our research is going to show, and that's what our policies need to support. Because if we really care about equity, we need to be thinking about job quality. What kinds of economic opportunity is created? And when we think about jobs, also people tend to have a few things in mind. But I want to clarify that we're talking about sort of two vectors for labor market research. So on the one hand, you have supply in the labor market, which is looking at sort of research into what the jobs are, how they're changing, how work processes change, how decarbonization affects job quality. And this is often work with OEMs, with government, and with our labor partners. There's also the demand side of the labor market, where we really look at how workers access quality jobs and how firms access skilled workers. And this really is research around everything from engineering career pathways to apprenticeships in construction, manufacturing, and other things that lead to transportation systems. So we are considering all of this applies to light duty, yes, but also to transit and also to freight. And reminding that the jobs across these sectors are research and development, they are production, they are maintenance and operations, they are decommissioning. So we're talking about a vast number of jobs, and we're going to focus research on a few of those areas. We have 3 areas of inquiry for our light duty work that we think there's bidirectional learning for the US and Mexico. So the first is about infrastructure, thinking about charging infrastructure. The second is about batteries, everything from minerals and production to recycling. And we're working with US DOE and the federal government on this, as well as our work in California. And then there's light duty production. And there's some interesting questions that I heard a lot about in Mexico last time I was here about trying to figure out solutions for broader access, gender access, thinking about opportunities for women in engineering in building a domestic Mexican engineering workforce, as well as thinking about in the US, access to women in manufacturing and construction and female entrepreneurship. So that's another area of research. I would say that the work is to see a number of things. It's first of all to see where high road choices are possible, where they are being made, and if those policies are in fact working to develop a high road economy. And I think there's some very specific questions that we have to ask about the role of government, the role of OEMs, and the role of labor. And just a couple examples, everyone knows the Biden administration's new industrial policy is pouring billions of dollars into the electrification of transport with job quality standards attached. We are looking to see how this works in practice at a state level. What does it look like in California as opposed to states that do not have as progressive a labor policy? And what is the impact then of domestic content standards throughout North America and in Mexican markets as well? The other thing is the state of California has made serious investments in both high road training partnerships, which are government, labor, and management partnerships organized by industry, including in transportation. And then we've also invested in high road transition collaboratives, which are regional economic development councils focused on decarbonization and job quality. I know there are similar organizations, intermediaries, and policy sets here in Mexico. So we want to figure out what are those? Can we share those lessons? And are they working as designed by policymakers? So I will leave you with that.
Okay, I'd like to say thank you and congratulate Isabel for this incredible gathering, this incredible, every time you raise a bar, and you are doing every time better and better. So I'm gonna move to Spanish because I need to poner muchas cosas que desearía en poco tiempo. Entonces, miren, lo primero es, mi intención es señalar que tenemos 1000 retos, pero el primer reto fundamental, no para México, para Norteamérica, está en el mundo del trabajo. Es un reto mayúsculo y tenemos que poner toda la atención sobre él. La segunda cosa que trataré de hacer es de poner algunas propuestas de política pública específica que logren conducir a la mesa siguiente con algunas ideas particulares que ojalá podamos retomar. Antes les digo unas palabras sobre las redes académicas que represento. Una es la red de transporte eléctrico y movilidades sustentables. Nosotros estamos priorizando, somos un grupo de investigadores de México, algunas cientos de investigadores de México que nos movemos en esta industria y en su transición. Y nosotros focalizamos el transporte público como clave. Primero, tenemos que trabajar el transporte público. El segundo elemento fundamental en esto es promover una cultura de movilidad diferente. Y esto tiene un radio muy, muy grande. Alguno de los presentadores en el primer panel nos decía, tenemos que movernos en bicicleta, tenemos que caminar, tenemos que hacer 1000 cosas. Pero los expertos nos toca trabajar por impactar la cultura. Esa es nuestra primera responsabilidad y lo tenemos que hacer con el ejemplo de nuestras instituciones, de lo que es posible, y luego trasladarlo a campos mayores. Enseguida trabajamos fuertemente en esto, en el mundo del trabajo. Tenemos una atención muy cercana a lo que está haciendo el acuerdo, nuevo acuerdo comercial y los arreglos y digamos, compromisos que se tomaron en ello al respecto. Y yo quiero recordarles que tenemos el acuerdo comercial más progresivo que existe hoy en el mundo. No perdamos de vista esto. Esto está en la posibilidad de crear un nuevo juego, no solo para América del Norte, para el mundo. Debiéramos de tomarlo esto mucho más serio y con mucha más atención, porque el mecanismo que trata de poner ahí es un mecanismo, por primer lugar, que pone el comercio y el mundo del trabajo en un nivel de inclusividad, en un nivel de igualdad, en un nivel de desarrollo que no ha existido hasta aquí en el mundo. Entonces, nosotros seguimos esto y vemos cómo es posible. ¿Qué está ocurriendo en México? Si estamos creando lo que se pretende como un nuevo modelo laboral y si los mecanismos que ahora se han puesto, yo estoy señalando esto, los mecanismos que está poniendo el nuevo tratado comercial pueden ser una especie del New Bretton Woods para el mundo. Fíjense lo que estoy hablando, son palabras mayores. Puesto de otra manera, podríamos tener la posibilidad de, en lo laboral, encontrar una ecuación nueva para el mundo con posibilidades de desarrollo y prosperidad que no conocemos. Esa es nuestra pregunta. Seguimos muy de cerca el tema del nearshoring y habría bastante que decir al respecto, pero quiero poner una cosa provocativa y desafiante. ¿Qué tal que las ecuaciones que venimos haciendo tengamos que revisarlas porque nos encontremos que el futuro es de los países emergentes? En los números que estamos trabajando y de pronto tengamos que trasladarlos y poner al revés la ecuación porque el caso que ocupa India o que ocupa China para aquellas regiones es el lugar que puede ocupar México para América. Bueno, esas son las cosas que tenemos enseguida. Ahora, déjenme situar en un minuto, a ver si lo logro, que tenemos no solo la oportunidad en el mundo del trabajo, tenemos un gran desafío. Déjenme decirlo, hay 3 millones de empleos técnicos y una cantidad de 500,000 a 1,000,000 de ingenieros que prevemos no vamos a tener para el 2025, para mañana. Para pasado mañana, el 2030, los números se van a incrementar. Déjenme decir, cada que las regiones en México crecen, ejemplo Nuevo León, ahora, con todas las inversiones, ¿qué es lo que encontramos? Que tenemos un cuello de botella inmenso en el mundo del trabajo, inmenso. Ya en este momento, en Nuevo León, hay una plaza calificada disponible de 5 que se necesitan. Pero estas cifras no son ajenas a Estados Unidos. En Estados Unidos, el problema de la escasez de trabajo calificado y el interés de la gente por trabajar en esta industria de la que estamos hablando y clave de la transición automotriz, energética, el corazón de todo esto, es gravísimo. La gente ha perdido interés y tenemos que cuestionarnos por qué. Hemos hecho muchas cosas mal en el pasado y hoy nos están costando. Hoy hablamos de un futuro y ponemos cantidad de metas, pues noticia, no atendemos los problemas del mundo del trabajo, no hay futuro. Todo se nos puede derrumbar como en un juego de dominó que hacemos clic en solo una fichita. ¿Qué más? Podríamos decir cantidad de cosas. OCDE y sus exámenes nos recuerdan las destrezas que necesitamos hoy día. Y esto que se llama CIMIT, que es Estados Unidos no se puede sentir orgulloso de ocupar el lugar 25 en matemáticas y ciencias de países de la OCDE. Y México por un ladito ahí igual o peorcito, ¿no? Entonces, las cosas son bastante serias cuando tenemos que cambiar todo el modelo absolutamente de capacitación, de formación de competencias y de creación de capacidades para enfrentar esto. Puedo hacer 4 propuestas de política pública para enlazarme ahí. No sé cómo
Sí,
está mi tiempo.
rápido, sí.
Bueno, rápido, por eso lo hacemos muy rápido. Desde luego, necesitamos todo esto que hablamos de cooperación transnacional. El primer objetivo debe ser un acuerdo laboral y un trabajo laboral para crear competencias a través de fronteras. Tiene que ocurrir eso. No lo vamos a poder, no lo van a poder hacer sin nosotros, nosotros sin ustedes, etcétera. 3 características de este acuerdo: tiene que tener un escalamiento de capacidades, tiene que tener una recreación de las capacidades existentes, que es diferente, y tiene que tener la característica de diversidad e inclusión e igualdad. Una cosa más que debe tener. Hoy los derechos humanos laborales y los principios RUGI tienen que estar en el centro de esto, con las ideas de proteger, de respetar, de remediar. Tenemos que contener en ello una perspectiva de movilidad laboral a través de fronteras, de movilidad calificada. No estoy hablando ahora de migrantes y cosas así, que es sumamente relevante. Te estoy hablando de un mercado que creamos deliberadamente y que lo vamos a mover, y en principio debe de moverse a las cadenas críticas de los 2 países. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for your presentations. Just a quick announcement, since we're running a little over time, we're going to go ahead and move to the next panel, the policy dialogue on light duty vehicles. I think our panelists from the research session have set us up with some great questions on the trade challenges, technology challenges, and labor challenges, and potential solutions that we look forward to exploring with industry and government representatives. So we'll have the next panel come up. There will not be a break between the 2 panels, so please stay in your seats. There will be a break following this panel. Thank you.